Something that I noticed when we were facilitating together that I was certainly observing, for my own practice, is that you're very skilled at collecting a wide range of responses. Like if the participants had just had an experience or you've just introduced like a certain stimuli that they're reacting to, you'll spend time harvesting people's responses and then connecting the responses, which is one of the primary skills of facilitation. But I was very impressed in the way that you collected the responses and reflected it back to the participants without like overly laboring a point. And sometimes I found that I almost feel this pressure to remark on what every person has shared. I mean, this was especially, I think I've definitely improved in this domain, but wanting to comment on what everyone has shared in order to make everyone feel heard and like validated so they can hear their name and they can be like, oh, like she remembered what I said, and it would stress me out a lot. Like sometimes it would even take me out of the moment because I would be like, okay, Susie said this and Anthony said this. This. And so, just my mind would be like scrambling with just trying to figure out like what is the best connection to make between the comments so that I can. And then that would trip me up because I would end up just being like, actually, I didn't even hear what Johnny said now because I'm so focused on trying to connect the comments. And, you would be able to intake this like large amount of information and then just like calmly like re-enter the conversation, touch on like what two different people said, connect them, and then like pivot to the next point in a way that felt very natural.
Thank you. It's a bit swan-like. It's underneath the surface. It's a bit
totally. That's a really good metaphor. That is what it feels like so often. Like you're calm and your brain is scrambling. So is your brain scrambling? Are you the swan, or have you found a magical technique?
I can't say I found a magical technique. I think that I was the same. Because again, I'm wanting to make people feel that their voice is valued and actively sought after, and we're trying to build equity into spaces that have got inherent like power dynamics at play all of the time. So first of all, on that point, actually, occasionally I will be really thinking about whose contribution in that moment maybe I ought to be uplifting. Maybe a little bit more, depending on what the kind of dynamics that I have observed or have noticed. And so I think that I removed the pressure to do that, remembering what everybody has said in lots and lots of detail in order to reflect it back. So I will normally, I'll normally pick a few things. If I've got a co-facilitator, that I know is also on the screen looking very engaged, then I feel like I can take a couple of notes. And so I will do that, like headlines. But I just remove the pressure to need to be able to take on the whole contribution. So I will take the soundbite, the snippet. So if they have said something that resonates with the previous activity, then I know that feels important. So I'll just take a snippet of that. I'll never be able to do everything that everybody has said on feedback from, say, small group work, but I might be able to do one person from each group. And if I forget the person's name, that's okay too. I will say, it's a bit like, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, I forget who in group one said that, but I know that group one were having a really brilliant conversation about this thing. So people still feel seen without that pressure on me to be like, A, B, and C said all of this, because I think that that's really difficult. So I think actually, the facilitation for me was being done for a lot of my career. It was happening in really unorthodox spaces, where we had little time and little resources, and little resources in terms of our own skill building as well. And so I was just in these really amazing and fortunate positions where I was watching more people with more experience and maturer practitioners doing really excellent work, and being around that and just being able to absorb that as a young facilitator and a young practitioner had such a massive impact on the way that I do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is so much more, having those opportunities are so much more than anything you might learn in a classroom. In a classroom, I learned how to write an effective session plan. Also, you know,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it wasn't how you hold space for folks. That was
No.
stuff I learned on the ground, watching other people do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is the truth, right? We just have to, first of all, facilitate, like practice our own facilitation, and then just watching other people facilitate. That's how you learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish there was a
Yeah.
more straightforward, like ABC way to do it. But yeah, absolutely. And I think the learning design is so important, but the learning design kind of evaporates the second you enter the group.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
present with the group. Like, it's a guide for sure, but you can tell when people are not actually present with
Yeah.
when facilitators are not actually present with what's happening in their group. And I've been guilty of that for sure. Like, because they just have an agenda, because they say like vaguely, oh, I think a person said this, so therefore I'm going to connect it to the point in my next agenda.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like
It
the person didn't
feels.
actually really
Yeah.
say that. Like,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
that's not what validation, like validation is not platitudes. Validation
Yeah.
is not always agreeing with the person either.
Yes.
Validating, you can validate somebody in their contribution whilst in a really difficult and sticky learning moment. Like you have to, I think, use the tool of validation in ways that are helpful and not tokenistic, because otherwise people just see right through it.
Yeah, that's such a brilliant point.